And we are back on the build phase. I'm Mr. Ben, and today we have a topic that is so hype that I couldn't handle it alone. So I am joined by one third of the now defunct Team Attack podcast, and someone that's definitely on my top 25 list of favorite people who live in Milwaukee. Peter, welcome back.
Wait, you know 25 people that live in Milwaukee?
Well, I figure Chicago's kind of like a suburb of Milwaukee, so that includes
Okay, yeah,
Team
that's fair.
Apex, and that's like roughly 40 people right there. So
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, okay. But I'm good. By the way.
So to start, it's probably no surprise if for anyone who's plugged into the Versus community, there was some news about a new IP that is coming to the game that has resulted in really strong feelings on both sides. Previously on the show, I talked to somebody who had some concerns about AEW specifically and wrestling in general and how it would fit together in Versus. And today, I'm joined by somebody who has a lot of excitement as opposed to concern. So, Peter, before we dive into the meeting of Versus and wrestling, why don't you lay out your wrestling credentials? Like, as a fan, what's your history with this form of sports entertainment?
It started for me when I was a kid back during the Attitude Era, The Rock coming up, Stone Cold Steve Austin, the big ones that kind of known throughout the world. Like even if you don't watch wrestling, you know who The Rock is. You may know who Stone Cold Steve Austin is. That kind of like PG-13 era is what it could be categorized for me. I remember watching it as a kid, and then we didn't have cable anymore, so I didn't watch it for years until I got my own place and got cable. I still didn't watch wrestling, but then AEW was announced, and I was excited because of one wrestler for me. It was Kenny Omega. The reason I was excited for him is because Mr. Ian Kender, I can never remember his name. He was an old versus player, and we gave him a Daredevil deck at a Gen Con. And he was like, "Hey, we were talking. We talked about wrestling for a little bit." And he's like, "You should go check out this wrestler." And I was hooked instantly because he started in Japan. It was huge. He worked the indie scene, and that's where I really started getting pulled back into this AEW kind of lower level than WWE. AEW starts. I have cable, and I'm watching it constantly. I lose cable, and I'm still watching it, but just not in cable sense. If you catch my drift.
Is this BitTorrent? Is that what we're talking about here?
It could be. I'm not gonna say. They run a full YouTube show on top of it called AEW Dark, which I watch that every week. They have two things, and they're not like so they're playing it smart, and they're only really competing with one WWE show on Friday. Everything else is kind of separate from them, so they're not super fighting for time, which is what I've liked about them. So that's kind of my AEW experience. I've been with them since day one. I love it. And I understand it's not WWE and it's not Marvel, but I'm still all in on this.
So I think the player that you're referring to was Ian Kinderline, I think his name was, and
Yes,
he got
yes,
one win at, was it Gen Con with Daredevil? Was that his?
yes. That was the Marvel Monsters You Unleashed box came out at that Gen Con,
Yeah.
along with Predator at the same time. And we built
Wait,
him a Daredevil deck,
did
and
he
he
get a
got one
win?
win.
Or was it that he just leveled up the one time? Which I don't remember now.
He got a win because the person he was playing dropped, but it's still a
Oh,
win.
geez. Okay.
And he leveled them up twice that entire that run.
Okay, so to
I think people were
recenter
just like, "I'm gonna
ourselves
level up
back to
Daredevil."
modern day versus instead of this
Yeah.
trip down memory lane,
So I
it was
think it
I
was
think. Oh,
before we
sorry. Go
go,
ahead.
before we go, I think it was just people giving him the level up just to see what if would actually matter. That's
Oh,
all.
we can't take it away from him, man. No, he earned those
No,
level
he got
ups.
the levels up. He got the levels up. That's all that matters.
Yeah, I'm firmly on the side that he earned them. They're in the record books, so they count, right? All right. So I think it was about 2 years ago when the initial partnership between Upper Deck and AEW for the collector cards and I think they do some other like memorabilia stuff when that was
Yes.
initially announced. And I don't remember who it was that said, "Oh, hey, this could open the door for AEW and Versus." And I remember my initial reaction was pretty negative. I thought this doesn't really make sense. Like wrestlers don't have superpowers. And I think, and now I might be misremembering a little here, but I think it was you who actually convinced me that my initial reaction was wrong. And I mean, I probably wasn't that hard of a sell. It was like, hey, comic book characters are wild. Wrestlers can be something to that effect. So if we could
Yeah.
rewind to that 2 years, what were your initial feelings, and do you kind of remember that sales pitch that you threw my way that kind of won me over?
So I think my sales pitch was something like, Ben, you have to look at it as comic characters are fake characters and wrestlings. They're just personas. They're not a real person. Some of them act like that in general life, but like this is who they are, and they have fancy super moves and like stuff like that, powers you could pay for. Like we could easily get a card that does something that keeps all like the flight and range out of everything or stuff like that. Like, and I'm sure there was more because I'm pretty sure Joe and John were like helping me. Like, you just got to calm down, no knee jerk reactions to it. Just see what happens. And I think that was more the thing is like just see what happens before we get anything because you trust Danny and Ben.
Hmm.
So why not give them something like this?
Well, and I feel like that argument is persuasive in any IP possible. We've seen people
Yep.
talk about, oh, I want to see Star Wars in the game, and there's some folks who are like, I'd rather not have that. I'd rather say yes to everything. I don't think there's an
Yeah.
IP that Danny and Ben can't make good cards out of.
Well, and any IP brings fans of that IP, so it gets eyes on it. So why not?
Yes. And speaking of
That's a real
fans,
question.
let's focus on AEW specifically. Now, I know when I talked to Jarrell a couple episodes ago, he certainly seemed to be more of a fan of the WWE end of things and had some criticisms for the overall quality of the wrestling. Obviously, you're a fan of AEW. What would you say in response to some of those critiques with regard to how the wrestlers are being treated? I think on Apex they talked about the wrestlers making face turns more frequently than they would like. Like as an AEW fan, sell me on AEW.
Okay, so I will agree that WWE is the big place to be because it's more noticeable. People tend to know who you are because it's more worldwide. AEW is kind of like the great value brand of WWE. It's perfectly fine, tastes exactly the same. It's just people look weirdly at it sometimes. It's the easiest way I can find it. The wrestling was kind of bad in the beginning. People were still finding out how to do it. I think they were worried about injuries early on because if you lose a big name like early on in an injury, you're just not going to gain any traction. I do agree with Apex on the heel turns. It seems like once they finish a run with like, okay, this guy didn't get the belt because we wanted it that way, but we got to turn him heel. He's got to be bad now because he didn't get what he wanted. Like that's my whole thing with AEW is I love how the wrestlers can still compete in the smaller wrestling things. They had an event called Forbidden Door, and what that means in wrestling terms is you're working with another company and people are allowed to go back and forth. They had an event called the Forbidden Door and had New Japan wrestlers, which is a huge thing over in Japan. They had Impact wrestlers come over. But the one guy that I like, Kenny Omega, was known as the belt collector because he had 4 different titles from 4 different companies, which was really cool. It lets people kind of fix their schedule. If you want to work a lot, you can work a lot because you can work all the independents. You want to work 2 days a week? Come work 2 days a week, Monday and Friday, and we'll keep it that way. I think that is what sold me on it so much. And I like over the top high flying stuff. Like, I love to see people who are like, I'm going to go to the third turnbuckle wall. This guy holds like, the bad guy on top. I'm going to grab his neck, bounce it on the ground while this other guy, the minute I get up, like praising that I did good, someone's going to kick me in the face. Obviously, very fake, but it's still really fun to watch. It's
Now,
like watching a marble battle.
when you're talking about the freedom that these wrestlers have, I'm assuming the reason this is part of the value of AEW is because WWE does not allow that. They lock their wrestlers into some kind of exclusive contract.
Yeah.
Now, I can
So
see as a wrestler why the ability to work with all these different companies would be really appealing. Do you like that about AEW because you're a fan of the wrestlers getting to do things that are good for them, or do you think that that freedom has like a tangible impact on the quality of the entertainment product?
I do believe sometimes it has a tangible quality because sometimes you get a new up and comer from a different company who hasn't really seen the big lights, so to speak, and he blows a couple spots here and there. He messes up just because nerves. So you might have that, or you might have the guy who's super experienced that is just working the small indies and just comes up and is ready to go. So it's kind of like a coin flip on what you're going to get when you see some of these people that you don't really know because you don't follow the smaller companies.
So there's like a novelty element to it, kind of.
Yes. I
Okay.
mean, there's wrestlers that pop up that I don't even know who they are. I don't even know when they started, but then they're talking about how they've been working for years in this place, but they finally got their big shot here in AEW.
All right. So with regard to how we would connect all of this to verses, we've kind of both flirted around and directly engaged with some of this, like, as far as like naming superpowers and that kind of thing. Again, assuming I'm somebody who's not familiar with wrestling, but I'm a big comic fan, I'm a versus fan, explain to me why wrestling is a good fit.
I think wrestling is a good fit because, like I said, they're like comic characters. They're just real people we can reach out and touch. They're still fighting the good fight, as you would say. They're still bad guys. They just keep it contained. So we could easily see cards that are like steel cage match. For the turn, characters till the start of your next turn, all characters lose flight and range. So you have to engage melee. There could be plenty of those kind of style of cards that do stuff like this. So that's why I think it'll mesh well with the comic. I think flight and range will always have an advantage. Both flight and range always have an advantage because there are a lot of frontline fighters. Look at Captain America. He's basically a wrestler. If you just made it a singlet
Oh
versus a
my
full body.
goodness. I thought the most offensive thing that was going to be said during this show was that Chicago is a suburb of Milwaukee, but you just called Captain America basically a wrestler? Holy smokes.
He's the idea of a wrestler. He's a man. Okay. Do you know what lucha wrestling is?
Yeah,
Before I
yeah,
get
the
into
Mexican
it. Okay.
wrestling, right?
So that's wrestling with the mask, correct?
Mm-hmm.
What does Captain America wear? He wears a mask. That kind of stuff. That's all I think. You take his shield away, and he's basically a one-on-one fighter. That's
Well, you don't
more
take it
okay. So
away, you just replace it with a folding chair, right?
yeah, exactly.
You're like,
I'm sure you could spin a folding chair off three walls. It's fine. I
oh,
feel
I
like
like the
Captain
idea
America
of this
chooses
already.
magic half the time, anyways.
All right, so if I'm one of these people who's like, hey, it's weird, the idea that Sting is going to be able to declare a melee attack onto Red Skull, or even stranger, uh, Dr. Britt Baker is going to attack with a folding chair equipment into Thanos. What's your reaction to people calling out the kind of like weirdness of that?
I would say this is very controversial, and I don't really want to say it, but I'm saying if that's not the set for you, don't buy that set. So, like, I would love everyone to go and buy this set, but some people won't. I mean, there's going to be the collectionists that will buy it and never touch it. It'll stay in that box. That's great. Support Upper Deck like that. Buy it and flip it to somebody else for a little bit cheaper. That's fine. Support is always good. But I wasn't I'm not a huge fan of the boys. I don't know if I'm going to buy that set because it just doesn't appeal to me. Buffy, what was your take on Buffy originally until you cracked the cards?
Yeah, I was very negative on Buffy. I did not think
Oh,
I was going to enjoy that set.
I think that's what the whole thing is. People are knee jerk reaction, but like you can just choose not to buy it. Guess you'll see it everywhere if the cards hang. Like the way the power creep is going, those cards are going to hang. But like they could just be garbage. They could just be that fun set that you're like, yes. Like Joe has suggested to me 1,000 times. Let's play a Royal Rumble format where every time someone takes a wound, a new person appears in, so you're all fighting free for all. Yes, I've thought about this format a lot actually.
I do like the idea of getting formats or battleground cards or terrains or even story mode cards that really lean into and take advantage of the types of things that wrestling does well. I would be willing to concede that if what they're trying to do is simply make more versus cards and slap a wrestling coat of paint onto it, that probably won't be super successful. But I don't think you can point to any release in the entirety of Versus 2PCG where that's the feeling where it feels like Danny and Ben just had these mechanics that they wanted to push out and they just grabbed any
Yeah,
random IP. I don't think that's how they
yeah.
operate. And I think it's really unfair to assume that they're incapable of doing this. I mean, they may be. Like, I'm open to the idea that these cards aren't going to impress me. But so far, almost everything they put out, I don't necessarily love every card in the set, but there's always something I like. There's always one or two that really stand out. And if you're a competitive player, there's almost always one or two cards that you have to buy the box for.
I bought X Files because it was cheap. I caught it on sale, and I know there's decent cards in there. But that's one of those things where how many cards of that box are you playing? Probably playing roughly 16 cards out of it, maybe eight, maybe 20 out of a 200 card box. So like, not everything is gonna be the best box ever. We're never gonna feel like that. I feel you should buy what you want to buy, play what you want to play. I'm super excited for AEW, but I don't expect Joe Schmo that worships Marvel to be super pumped for it just because Banny and Banny, Danny and Ben are doing it.
I think we have a new nickname for Super Awesome Games now.
Banny,
Banny.
I'm okay with this.
How big do you think the impact will be on the versus community? Given how popular AEW is, we know there's some crossover between card players and wrestling fans, given the admittedly somewhat short-lived but successful nonetheless WWE card games that have come out. How big is this? Do you think this is an IP that's on par with Mortal Kombat? Do you think this is poised to potentially bring more players to the game than Mortal Kombat? What's your prediction on that?
I do not think that it will bring in more than Mortal Kombat. I feel like there's more crossover with fighting games and card games than there is wrestling. Could be totally wrong. My ideal goal would be for AEW to sell, monumental, like they actually have to do a reprint or two because people are just buying it because it's AEW. Because they should, in theory, have cut a deal where they're going to advertise that at least a little bit. But ideally, I would take the same numbers that Mortal Kombat brings in. I would love new people. I always love new people, but like I don't think it's going to be like this amazing groundbreaking thing.
The last time we got together and talked about new IPs, it was me, you, and Jason, and I I think it was Jason that made the point of Versus got Buffy a little after its prime, and Versus got X Files kind of after its prime, and being excited that Mortal Kombat and The Boys are both hot
Yeah.
right now. They're not things that were popular years ago. Admittedly, the Marvel movies are very popular, so, but on these non-Marvel IPs, I don't know wrestling, but from the outside, I feel like the AEW set could potentially be like lightning in a bottle. It seems like that could bring a lot of players to the game who would never otherwise take a look at it at all. And yeah, you're probably right that Mortal Kombat is a little bit more natural of an evolution from a Mortal Kombat fan to a competitive card game fan. But I want more people. I want Versus to survive and thrive, and I'm hard pressed to see the downside of reaching out into these other fandoms and trying to be like, hey man, come check out what we've been doing for half a decade.
I mean, that I 100% love that because once you get that AEW person, they're like, "Oh, what are you playing? Oh, I love Marvel movies. That's in this too." Like, okay,
Hmm.
okay, let's get you rolling. And the photo universe is one of those things where it goes from super easy to complicated if you want, or you can just stay in that nice kind of medium zone where there's some complications, but it's not overly. It's not just play whatever. You just have to think about it.
AEW is going to be photographic, right?
I would put like I don't know, whatever. I'll put any kind of money on it. Like, I mean, it'd be sweet if it's illustrated, but illustrated doesn't need that kind of stuff. I think it'd be too hard to like work it into illustrated because illustrated is where they really kind of go nuts on stuff.
And we haven't
Hence
got a
why I think,
non-Marvel illustrated set since
so,
Aliens. No, Predator came second.
yeah,
So it's been a long time. I think
yeah.
the non-Marvel IP has kind of found its home in the photographic universe. They've never officially announced that, but that certainly, just by seeing the track record of how releases have gone, it seems like that's what the plan is.
I would have liked Mortal Kombat to be illustrated just because of the artwork on it, but if they make it photo, they make it photo. Feels like
Yeah.
they're kind of banking on photo.
With stills from the video game, it feels like a more natural fit in
Oh,
photo to
yeah.
me visually.
I would like to bring up AEW is the perfect time to introduce Battlegrounds into photo. Start switching the rings up, special events, all tables match, ladder match, steel cage match, just a normal one that does nothing to the battlefield. That kind of stuff would be great.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
And give me an announcer pile where I can pull funky cards that do effects to the world.
Oh, so
I am super
I
pumped
hadn't
for
even
this.
thought about that, but potentially you could have like a supporting character who's an announcer, which I don't know who those characters' names are, but presumably you could have an announcer who has like a side pile of like hype cards or the
Yeah,
crowd's booing cards or like that kind of effect as well.
yeah, I would
I
love
don't know if
that.
that's the most exciting direction to take it, but it's certainly something they could do to kind of add that wrestling flavor, which again is the thing that Banny is so good at. I don't like it. I
I
don't
don't know
think we're
if
going
I'm
to stick with
regret calling them
that.
that.
Yeah, I'm not going to stick with that.
Yeah, but yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for cards, but there could be a lot of downfall because people could react badly to them, or they could hit that power level a little too wrong. Like those finisher moves, like you always reference CM Punk, so we'll use his, which is called Go to Sleep, which is literally just I'm gonna drop you from a height and put a knee into your face. They could go horribly wrong and say like 2 green KO an enemy character, just complete enemy.
What do you
Like that's
think?
the one thing I'm worried about is the finishers.
So let's game out two possible different like worst case scenarios.
Okay.
Would it be a disaster if the cards come out and they're just kind of weak? They don't make any kind of impact competitively within AEW versus AEW. The balance is fine, like it is with Aliens or Predator. But outside of that silo, they don't make a big impact on the overall meta. Is that, or the opposite side of that, the cards come out and they're so good that if you want to play in a tournament, you kind of have to play these wrestling cards. Which one of those two kind of balancing error scenarios do you think would get people more upset?
I think that you have to use these because from what it seems like, there's a very not like an incredibly small niche, but a smaller niche of people who are like excited for these versus the people that are not excited for these. And I'd rather see cards in competitive play that people want to play. I don't want to play Mimic, 4 Icemans, 4 Outrider, whatever the easy like old school Mimic
Hmm.
was. Like I want to play the stuff I want to play.
Yeah, to me,
And
really
like if I
the drawback if the cards are weak is going to be the new people who
yeah
get brought in by AEW once they start playing with other people might feel a little grumpy about the power level.
yeah, and then they might not buy another set.
Which would be bad. And I
Yep.
do want the game to attract new people, but I think this is a point on which I totally side with like servicing the older players. Don't If somebody doesn't want to play AEW, I don't want to live in the world where they have to buy it just to play at a competitive level in a tournament. And now typically I think we can put some faith in Super Awesome Games that they're going to thread the needle and there's going to be powerful cards that are playable in a tournament but not necessarily staples, and they're not going to
Yeah.
give us a whole box full of filler. I think that's where we're going to
Yeah.
end out.
I think that is. My guess is that we will see like 1 or 2 higher drop characters that might happen and some plot twists that will really like maybe make deck shines. So that's usually
Yeah.
how it goes. It's like a small niche of something that really just helps out decks along the way or pushes that one character that was really just missing something over the top.
I think this would be a cool place to throw in some generic plot twists like flying kick or
Yes.
elbow strike or some of these like martial arts
Yeah.
moves that are maybe a little more generic than you would use for
Yeah.
comic book characters, but they fit really well here. I think that could be really cool.
Yeah. Because instead of calling it like flying kick, you just call it drop kick. Anyone can do a drop kick.
Yeah.
It's just making it look cool. That's all it is. So yeah, I would love some generic, just fight or defensive plot twists, just something that really just helps out everybody.
We know there's going to be two teams. Do you have predictions on what those two teams will be?
No clue. I think someone put out, are they just gonna call it heel and faces? I think they just might do that. Like, I don't know what you're gonna call it. There's so many like little factions in AEW. There's no like one. This is the one to be in, where you're on this side.
Heel turns, if I'm using that term correctly here, given they do heel turns with such frequency within the company, it seems like it would be hard to make one
Yeah,
wrestler sort of like this is going to be like Iron Man and Captain America on the Civil War teams. Uh,
yeah. I mean, I'm fine with that. That box was perfectly okay. The only thing that sucked on it is that everything was good, so it was very hard to make a cube out of.
Hopefully, this
Um,
wrestling box will give us. Maybe we'd need multiple boxes, but the idea of doing either sealed or draft within the confines of just wrestling cards is pretty appealing to me.
I'm kind of excited to see what their locations are going to look like too.
Oh yeah. Do you think they'll still have the same names, or that this will be another instance where they give locations unique names?
I would love them to give like the name of some of the bigger like venues that they've played. So like they started in I think Florida, Jacksonville, Florida. That's where some of the EVPs are, and they played at this one venue the entire pandemic. Like, so I would love that for to be one, and maybe like it was announced in Chicago because that's where a lot of these guys are also from. Announce that venue, and then just play around with what it is. I'm more worried because right now their ring has a DraftKings sign on it. How old, what ring they're gonna do, which seems ridiculous. Who would bet on wrestling? Never mind. That's a different tangent. I'm very sorry.
Do you
Like I love
remember
wrestling,
like
but I would never place money on it.
do you remember way back in the day the Simpsons plotline where Krusty the Clown lost all his money because he bet against the Harlem Globetrotters?
Yes, that's exactly what that is.
That yeah, that's what that feels like to me.
I have bet buying someone a beer or something just because it seemed like that was the natural flow of something. I'm totally okay with that, but I'm not going to put real. I mean, I guess that is real money, but
It's a little different though.
yeah, it's very different.
All right. So the main thing I wanted to do was give the excited proponent of AEW a voice on the show to talk about how wrestling's a good fit or could potentially be a good fit for Versus and sing the praises of what this IP announcement was. Is there anything else that I didn't touch on that you think a versus player who's on the fence with AEW that they need to hear from somebody who is in support of this IP inclusion?
So even if you're not a fan, buy the set. I know I told you don't buy the set, but buy the set because show that you love what Danny and Ben are doing with multiple IPs because that lets them start branching out into more different ones and we start getting diversity in verses. I, for one, will love more than just Marvel. Everyone says DC, whatever, bring DC if you can. Bring more diversity. That's what I want. Bring me AEW. Get one that would be WWE. That'd be really cool to finally start answering those questions. Who would win? That's why you should buy it.
In my heart, the thing about Versus that I love so much is it reminds me of being like 8 years old and pulling out all the action figures from the toy box. And I've got my Dick Tracy and
Yes.
the sidekick figure that was the only one left at KB Toys from whatever Saturday morning cartoon, but a whole patchwork of different
Yep.
individual toys, and I can't find fault in expanding that toy box to contain wrestling toys too.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. If that's how versus should be looked at, you are literally plucking IPs and being like, let's build a deck. Did you ever play the Overpower game?
I'm aware of it. I never played it.
They got into image and stuff, so that made me really excited about that. Stuff that's not the norm for this game is always the most exciting for me.
Yeah.
I was originally apprehensive about X Files, but I bought it because it's cool to have something that's not just Marvel.
All right. Well, is there anything you want to plug, promote, or shout out before we wrap up the show?
Yes, you should join the Build Face Patreon. It's a cool place. And you get your name shouted out, so you can't
Coolest
go wrong
clubhouse
there.
in Versus. I've heard people say.
Yeah, it is. 1,000,000%.
Patreon.com/the build phase. As always, love to all of the patrons. They keep the lights on around here. And if you like what we're doing, like Peter said, you can join us at patreon.com/the build phase. I guess go win some games.
Yeah, go definitely win some games.